What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Dr. Lani Leary, who specializes in working with chronically ill, dying and bereaved clients. She has worked for more than 30 years as a psychotherapist in private practice, as a chaplain in the intensive care unit of a hospital, and as a counselor in 8 hospices across the USA. Now, caring for a terminally ill loved one can be the single biggest challenge of your life. Drawing from her experience sitting with over 500 people as they die and caring for her own terminally ill father, Dr. Lani Leary gently guides caregivers, families and friends through the difficult transitions of illness, death and bereavement. Now, she joins me today to discuss her latest book, No One Has to Die Alone. Dr. Lani Leary, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on, and I love the interviews that consist of in a sense, the near-death experience. And this is a bit more than just the near-death experience. We're going to discuss your book and the sort of dying process as well, and the jobs that you've been doing since being 29 and having your near-death experience. So, just to begin with, just for the audience and for myself, just tell us a bit about growing up in a sense. Did you grow up in a household that was religious, spiritual? Was it neither?
No, I didn't grow up in a household that was religious or spiritual. In fact, our Sundays were spent outside in nature's church. Every Sunday we were sailing, and that was the way that we had family time. So I didn't grow up with any kind of organized religious view. And then when I was 13, my life really changed because unexpectedly my mother died. And I was trying to find some meaning out of that, and really wanting to resolve that this would not be a tragedy in my life or define me in a victim way. And so I think from the time I was 13, I was searching, but I didn't have any religious or spiritual context to do that within.
When Mum passed away, that must have been an absolutely terrible time, because from browsing through the book, from what I understand, you didn't actually get to say goodbye to her.
No, I didn't. She was ill. She was what I thought she just had the flu. And so I took my two younger brothers out of the home just so that she could sleep that day. And when I returned, her bed was empty. And a friend had taken her to the hospital, and she died 2 days later. And we were not allowed to go to the hospital. She had been in surgery. She was in intensive care. And with my father's best intentions, thought that it wouldn't be a good thing for children to see her in that state. So she was in the hospital, and I knew it was serious because her parents flew in from the mainland. And the next thing I knew, in the middle of the night, her mother came next door where I was staying and told me that she had died. And we were all very surprised.
And what did she pass from?
She had, at the time in the 60s, a virus called Guillain-Barré. And it was a neurological virus, but in the 60s, nobody knew really what it was. It was very difficult to diagnose. And there were times when she didn't have she had neuropathy in her hands and feet, but that was the only sign that we had. But in Hawaii at that time, everyone had died of it. And I think she was the last.
Wow. Okay. So when you look back now with everything that you've been through, which we're going to get into as well, but when you look back at that time in your life, which probably seems so distant now, but do you see, was there a bigger picture, do you think, why that happened at such a young age?
You mean from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah.
Well, I will say that as I look back now, it has formed my life, and it has driven my path and my passion and my work. And I wouldn't have asked for that experience in my life, though I think at some level I did, some soul level I did. But at that time, I certainly didn't think that way. But of course, I learned so much through that experience that has really formed, I hope, my character.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's I mean, at the time, none of these things make sense. It's just absolute devastation. And okay, now before we move on to the near-death experience at age 29, in between that period of when, obviously from with the loss of Mum and until that, your near-death experience, had you got into many sort of textbooks? Had you read much up on near-death experiences?
No.
What was your spiritual path at that time?
No, I didn't. I wouldn't say I had a spiritual path from 13 to 29. I did. Actually, my healing after my mother's death was to write and write and write and write, because I didn't have anyone in my life who would listen to me, my fears, my concerns, my thoughts, my grief. I didn't have anyone to help me organize that. So I put a lot of it down into writing. It was a very lonely time and a very shameful time, because actually, with the absence of information about how she died or why she died, I had to make meaning of it. And one of the things I know is that, and one of the reasons why I counsel families and children through loss, is because I know that in the absence of information, children will make up information. And so in my case, I made up the reason that my mother died was that her only daughter had not told her recently that I hadn't told my mother I loved her. And so I was the cause of her death. So it was a very difficult adolescence because I had so much guilt and shame, and no one countered that belief, you see, that I was the cause of her death instead of an illness. So I did marry when I was 22 and had my only child at 26. And we did go to church at that point when we were starting a family.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I was religious.
No, no. What was the career path at that moment as well?
I had gone back to school to get my master's degree in special education for the blind, and found out that what I really loved the most of that work was counseling. So I was doing work with the blind, and had a baby. So I was doing some of the work off and on. And then
Right.
at 29 is when my career path really changed.
Well, that's pretty great. I mean, so at that time, you had a kid, you was doing a master's degree. I mean, that was cutting edge in a sense, wasn't it? For women at that time to do that, and it wasn't that long ago. But what I'm saying is, I know,
I was going to say, I'm
no,
not that old.
no, but to do these things,
Yes.
it's still, I know what it's like for other cultures that go against the grain and do these things. It's not at the time. It's not the said thing, but nowadays, it's still a big thing to do a master's. But you were juggling a number of things at that time. So, yeah. Okay. Now, you're going to the dentist just for some regular treatment.
Yes, just a regular routine. I think it was a filling. And I was given laughing gas, nitrous oxide, and no reason to expect any difficulties. In my youth, I had never done drugs, never smoked, and I hadn't had alcohol either. So I think that my system was very raw, pure. And to have this nitric oxide, I don't believe that it was anyone's fault. I think I just had an allergic reaction to it. And so my body went into anaphylactic shock. And that was the beginning of the near-death experience, which changed my life.
That's interesting. Okay. So nothing prior to that. This was the first ever time that experience has happened. What was the experience as you can remember it? And does it still feel as real today as it did back then?
Oh, absolutely. It feels as though no time has passed. It's right here. And that is one of the hallmark signs of a near-death experience, is that it is so vivid. It's not like a dream where you forget parts of it. It's all so close to me. The near-death experience, my experience of it was that I was in the dentist chair one moment and put a mask, the dentist had put a mask over my mouth and nose. And the next minute, I was up in the corner of the room on the ceiling. My consciousness was looking down at a body. And I knew that the body in the dentist chair was not who I was. And I felt only a fondness for it, like my body was old clothes that I had worn and used well, but it was not me. And I had no sense of anxiety, fear, any discomfort at all. There was no fear, no discomfort as I was looking at my body. But the dentist was frantic, and I was trying to communicate with the dentist that I was okay, not to worry. But of course, he didn't receive that message. And there was no sense of time, so I can't tell you how long I was in the upper ceiling corner. But the next thing I knew, I was outside of the room going into a tunnel. And at the entrance to the tunnel was my mother. And I had not seen my mother for 15 years. And in those 15 years, every single day, I had thought or said to myself, I wish I could ask Mom this. I wish Mom could see this. I wish I had Mom with me. And as she was at the entrance to that tunnel, with her arms open to me First of all, I completely recognized her. Without a doubt, it was my mother. But it was my mother who was healed and whole and vibrant and beautiful. And that's significant because she didn't die that way. What I knew in that instant was that in death she had been healed. And she was there to receive me. And it was complete love, unconditional love. And we communicated, but we communicated telepathically. So words didn't come out of my mouth, but words came out of my heart, my soul. And I said to her, I miss you. And she said, what I received telepathically was a vibration like her arms going around me saying, I know. Very, very powerful. And then I said, I love you, because I had not been able to say that before she died. And she said again, I know. And again, the power of her statement. And what I knew in that connection with her was that she and I had never been separated. She had always been with me. And she did know all the details of my life that I had wanted to share with her. And in that knowing, which has not left me, I knew that she had always been with me and would always be with me. And it surprises me still that I could let go of that connection, because in the next instant, I was drawn to this light at the end of the tunnel, and I had to go to it. So I proceeded into this tunnel, which was a beautiful, magnificent, opalescent blue. And I heard some music. And I went towards the light, and the light became bigger and brighter and more powerful, even though I could look right into it, like you would imagine looking into the sun. And I came closer to the light, and the light was in front of me, and then the light was around me, and then I was in the light. And what I knew in that moment was that the light and I were made of the same substance. And I was loved unconditionally like nothing I've ever experienced here. I was accepted beyond question. Everything I ever believed I needed to be forgiven for was already forgiven. And this was the most blissful, loving presence I ever experienced. And I wanted to stay there, even though I had a new baby and a loving husband, and my life was good. I wanted to stay. But the light said to me, you must go back, again, in the same telepathic way. You must go back. And I responded almost yelling, no. And the light again said, you must go back. You have work to do. And I still yelled no. And then I felt like I was coming back through the tunnel, almost as though I was in a blender, like a whirling. And the next thing that I knew, I was back in the chair, in the dentist chair.
When you was in this timeless place, this place where, which would you call it home?
It was home.
Home?
It was my home, and it is still where I belong. Actually, I believe where we all belong, but it was where I belong. It was where I came from. It was where I will return. And it informed me, I mean, almost like being downloaded with not even information, but wisdom and a peace beyond anything I've ever known. And it gave me, it still informs my work. It still provides me courage and patience and compassion. It's a source of love. And because I can remember it so vividly, and other people who've had near-death experiences will tell you the same, it feeds me.
So there's still a connection even now, in a sense.
Very powerfully.
Yeah,
Very powerfully. It is my spiritual connection.
Was there anybody? Was there any other presence there apart from Mother that you felt, in a
Not
sense?
that I experienced, and other people's experience is different, but mine was most predominantly my mother, and then this light, which was a presence. Yeah.
And I suppose then as well, you wouldn't know whether it was just that particular level that you was aware of, or if there were infinitive levels in a sense, and this was just the entrance into something that is home and something that's beyond our conceptualization. So that it's difficult to even answer that question, isn't it? In a sense,
It
but
is.
was there? It feels like from what you're saying, there was much more than just what you were aware of.
I wasn't looking for anything. It felt actually as though everything was provided in that. I don't remember thinking, I wonder if there's something beyond this. I was home and I wanted to stay there. It was a place of complete safety and love, and I mean, beyond anything that I have words for, really. And so sometimes people will say to me, well, do you think that that was Jesus? Do you think that that was Allah? And my response to that is that words don't even come close to a description of that. Our words are so limiting as to what that experience was. That was a visceral, spiritual experience for me that is very difficult to put into words.
And it's almost like, for people that I've interviewed as well, and from my own understanding, we create our reality even now. So it's quite possible that when we cross over, we create that reality as well. Even there is truth to that reality. It's our truth that we're projecting into that reality. So if we want to see Jesus or
As an
Buddha,
understanding, perhaps.
or any other religious figure, then they will, perhaps they will be there to greet us. But then maybe there's some sort of dissolving that takes place in the end when there's a bigger truth even behind that, in a sense.
Yes.
I don't know.
I think when we come back and we try to put it into words, we put it into the only words that we know, and an intellectual conceptualization and understanding. And our words come from our cultural experience. And so that's where the limiting comes from. But for me, it's bigger than that.
What person were you prior to the near-death experience, and who were you soon after?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think like a lot of people who have a traumatic experience, I think before the traumatic experience, they were a bit naive, which that's not pejorative, but there's a layer of protection when we don't know some deeper things. And I think some of the veil was taken off around me when I was 13 and I lost my mother. So I knew things as a child, as an adolescent, that a lot of my peers did not know. I knew about the fragility of life. And then when this veil was taken off and I saw something grander, I knew that I had a responsibility when I came back. I don't want to say a weight, because it wasn't a burden, but there was a level of consciousness of taking this all with more portent than I had before. And so when I returned, I do remember thinking, well, if I'm back here and I don't really want to be back in this heavy, difficult world, I better be back for something, I better be able to recognize it. And I didn't know what the work was when I came back. And there was a great deal of frustration about that for a while, until a couple months later, when I was reading a newspaper, and this too is very clear to me. A couple months later, I was reading a newspaper and I flipped open the page, and right there was a full-page article about hospice. And before I even read it or knew what the article was about, the word yes just seemed to come off of the page at me. And I knew in that moment that I was to work with people who were dying and grieving. And in hindsight, it would be like, oh, well, of course you're supposed to do that, because I had no fear of death or the end of life, because I had seen it, that there was no end. And so I marched myself into the local hospice and began working with them. And it's been the most glorious journey since then.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And who did you share the story with initially, and what was their reaction to it?
Well, I didn't share the story with anyone, but when I came home from the dentist, my husband took one look at me and said, "What happened?" And I don't know what it was about my demeanor that would have tipped him off, but my husband was the only person I told for about 5 years. First of all, I'd never known anyone who had this experience. I had not read any books about this, and it was very difficult to put into language. But I knew that my life was different, my priorities were different, and I knew that I knew the things of this world were not important in the way that I had believed them important before. Ambition was not what I was going to strive for. Recognition was not important to me. It was doing anonymous work around healing and compassion and kindness that was going to motivate me. And I knew that if my husband couldn't be on board about that, in other words, if he had different values, that we probably wouldn't last. We wouldn't make it together. My husband would be the first to say that he doesn't understand my experience, but he accepts it, and he sees how my life has changed, and he's been my greatest supporter.
Yeah, they say that, don't they? That, some couples that go through this, one of the couples has gone through it, that sometimes they don't last. But like you say, because
that's right.
He accepted it, and actually he supported you in that sense. It was all meant to be.
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Oh yeah, but no, that's lovely. That's absolutely lovely. Wow. Okay. So, so you go into the hospice work. Well, was that eventually? Did you get trained for that? Did you stop the masters you were doing and change direction?
No, I had completed my master's before that, and I had worked with the visually impaired. At that point, I went into hospice and I started to volunteer. And then I went back to graduate school and I got my PhD, my doctorate in counseling psychology. And I specialized in all of my work, all of my study was around thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. So I have a degree in that and a license, and that's the professional work that I do now. But I took that into each hospice that I worked in, and I worked in 9 different hospices across the United States. So, different population, different opportunities, different perspectives in different hospices, and it all just served to build and build. They taught me. All those thousands of patients taught me.
Yes, and we're going to get into that as well. We're not going to do the book much justice in 1 hour, 51 minutes. And the book's been coming on the screen as well right now. To get the full story and to and the in-depth resources that are in the book. Obviously, you need to purchase the book, but just to try to cover some of the bits that could really help people right now. In what they're going through, I think that's important. How do your peers take your work as well? Your PhD peers, when they find out that they have discovered that you had a near-death experience?
Well, people who are struggling with that themselves in their families, so they have a loved one who's dying, they often ask for information and guidance. Unfortunately, I find that people ask too late. And there's so much, my work is about advocating and educating so that we can find out what our loved ones want at the end of life before it's too late, before they can't communicate their values. So I'm all about going into families and really having those difficult conversations that most people don't want to engage in. Talking about if you had a choice, where would you want to die? who would you want to be with you? What is it you want to do before the end of your life? Let's make all of those things happen. And if we talk about it, people are much more likely to be able to live right up to their last day.
Yes, absolutely. And now I know you've been with, over 1,000 patients, and I think in the book you talk about 500 of those patients you actually saw through the dying process.
Well, I've seen more than 500 through the dying process, but I've been with at least 500 people at the moment that they died, which
Right,
was
yes.
such a privilege, sacred time, almost like being invited into the birth, of a new child. To be able to see someone out is quite a privilege.
Absolutely, it is. We're so scared of talking about death sometimes within families, when actually it's the most natural process. And we all have this one thing in common. We're all going to pass on at some point. What would you say was the most common thread in people that are passing on or about to cross over, in the sense of any regrets and not doing things that would have made them happy, in a sense, or fulfilling their life purposes? Or
Well, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because my findings from what people have told me as they're dying is that they are less afraid of dying per se than they are afraid of being emotionally abandoned at the end of their life. And that happens when people pull away from the real experience of their loved one dying. In other words, they don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. They don't want to talk about what's really going on. So your mother is dying, and the daughter walks into the room and talks about the weather. If I'm dying, the weather is the last thing I care about. I want to talk about our relationship and what I'm grateful for, and to review my life with you, and to talk about what legacies I might leave with you. Those are the things that matter to a dying person, not the mundane. But we have to, in order to talk about what's real, we have to admit what's real. And for so many people, that is very scary. And so I try to go into families and model what it looks like to be able to speak about what's most important to the dying person, to show them really how to be close to the person, to touch the person who's dying, to comfort the person who's dying, but mostly to be authentic.
yeah, I suppose it's been an amazing experience, as in the scale of different ideologies behind where they think they're going to go to, and even those who atheists as well, I suppose, who think that that this is it, and that must scare people as well, to think that they're just going to switch off, and all they've experienced, all they've accumulated, it comes to nothing, in a sense.
Well, they do, patients who are dying do want to wonder. And they want to wonder with someone. They want to be able to express their fears with someone instead of being dismissed quickly, such as, oftentimes a person will bring up the thought of, I'm afraid of what happens after death. And the listener will say, oh, don't think about that. That's morbid. Well, it is what I'm thinking about. I'm dying. And so we need to be able to be present with people and whatever feelings and concerns come up for them. Yeah, all of it.
How healing has it been for people that you've been around, for you to share your story to them? I mean, you must have healed a lot of people just before they transitioned by sharing that story of what you've been through.
Well, actually, I don't share it unless someone asks. I don't want to proselytize in any way. It's only my experience. It's like a travel log, in the same way that I went to Tahiti. But what's very interesting to me, and not surprising, is that oftentimes right at the end of life, as I'm companioning someone in their transition, they will have a vision, and they'll look at me and say, "You know where I'm going, don't you?" And I'll say, tell me why you think so. And this person who's dying, over and over this has happened, that they'll say, well, I see my dead mother at the foot of my bed, and I'll join in conversation with them because I think that's completely normal. And I validate that experience because that experience is comforting. It is not a hallucination. It is a pre-death vision. And consistently, those visions are of loved ones coming to them saying, I'll be here, I'll take you over, I'll pass over with you, or I'm waiting for you. And so the patient, the dying person, will say to me, my mother's here and she's ready to take me. And I'll say, how does that feel to you? And she says, oh, I'm so ready to go with her, or something like that. And she says, how do you know that? And so then I may share my story. And really, I think it's so important. And some of my work is about going in and educating medical personnel, doctors and nurses, that these experiences are not psychotic. They are not hallucinations, and that we really need to validate them because it is one of the most comforting moments in this challenging transition. Why would we take that away from a patient?
That's right. And when the experiment happens again and again with the same results, because
yes.
it's like, hey, hello.
But this is not an unusual experience for me.
No, but that it's repeatable though, isn't it?
Yes. And so I just stay open to the experience, and sometimes I'll ask people, has there been anybody in the room with you? Oh, thank you for asking, they'll say. I can't talk to my family about this. They think I'm crazy. Well, I want to know about it, I'll say. Tell me about it. And there's such relief in their voice that they can share it.
Yeah, and I've heard some nurses who have done this as well, where they leave the window open.
Yeah, yes.
They're actually taught that, I think, in part of their training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Though, of course, they don't need a window to come through.
Well, no, but I think it's
just
symbolic.
As a metaphor, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Because my friend's mother is a nurse, and she tells me about these things. So it's always, it's and she tells me the same story in another country about they say their relatives are there and they've come to collect them, and some of their relatives may not be at the end of the bed. They may be floating in the corner. Yeah,
absolutely. But you see, it reduces the patient's fear and softens their anxiety. And it's such a helpful preparation for the end. And it also informs caretakers that then I can call the rest of the family and say, it's close, and if you want to, you may all want to be here now.
My ex-girlfriend came to see me over Christmas, and I had 2 days with her, and I'd not seen her for a year and 5 months. And there was just in those 2 days so much I wanted to tell her. To get that forgiveness out there and, sorry about things, and just to really, if I didn't ever have a chance to tell her again, just to be honest with her. And it was so nice, it was. And I can relate that in that moment of what it's like for these people on that are dying, that want to get their life story out. I wanted to tell
Well, Kevin, you bring up
truth.
such a good point, because what you were doing in that, you seized an opportunity to finish some business with someone that was important to you. And what would it be like? I mean, one of the things that the near-death experience taught me was to live my life every day as though I might die tomorrow. And the truth is, I might. So the people that I love know it ad nauseum.
That's so true what you've just said there. That's so true what you've just said there.
Yes, but the point is that we can choose to live that way so that we have no regrets. What a powerful way to live. And that's one of the most important things that the near-death experience taught me. Yeah.
And in your book as well, I briefly read, I must say, but you talk about dying is painful in a sense, and death is not.
Death is not. No, that was the other very profound. The process, letting go of this body, can be painful. It doesn't have to be painful, which is why I really advocate for hospice to be brought in sooner rather than later, because there's so much that we can do with palliative care and pain management. But The moment of death is not, and one of the things I really work with my families to accept is that what you see at the moment of death is not what the person is experiencing. And that's very, very profound, because oftentimes at the end you will hear the death rattle, the gurgling in the throat, which sounds painful, but it is not. Or a person will be flailing and there's often a picking at the end of life, which, kind of picking at bedclothes or sheets. And it looks like the person is very anxious and restless, but that is not the experience inside the patient.
No, absolutely. And
so I think for the bereaved to know certainly that after death, like right now, your mom died yesterday. Right now, she is only feeling peace. So whatever you remember of her death process, you can let go of, because that's not what she took with her. That wasn't her experience. And let's remember all of the good of her life, not the one moment of her death.
Yeah, and I suppose for the families that are there witnessing the passing, it's in that moment, it's kind of like finding meaning in all this, isn't it, as well?
Yes, but I don't think we find meaning in what looks like a tragedy or a struggle. I don't think there has to be meaning in the struggle. I think we can find meaning in the peace, or meaning in the intimacy that we created at the end of life. If people will engage in what is real and authentic and of value to the dying person, we can have the most meaningful, intimate time of perhaps our entire relationship, because we have been open and vulnerable and truthful.
And then it's the grieving, isn't it, as well after that, the grieving of the loss, that then they're not there. We can't call them again.
Yes, but if we have engaged at the end of life, our grief is different, and I teach that a lot. So if you have fully engaged at the end of your life, at the end of your loved one's life, and I did everything I could, I said everything that was true, my mother knew that I was there for her, there will be less regret, and there will be sadness after she dies. But to not have that regret is very powerful.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. Yeah, I mean, these are tough subjects, aren't they? But the way that you're explaining it, and the process, and the advice that you're giving in this moment is very powerful, very powerful.
Well, we can make a difference.
Yes.
See? We can make a difference to our loved one, and don't we all want to do that? We can make a difference in a loving way, but also we can make a difference with ourselves and our own process. Because if we love, we will grieve. If we're attached to someone, we will lose them. But how we feel about it afterward, I say that I want to feel gratitude rather than grief. I want to feel love rather than loss. And though I was not able to be there for my mother when I was 13, I vowed to spend the rest of my life preparing myself so that I would be able to be there for my father when he died.
And it's funny you bring Dad up, because I actually did want to speak about Dad. But just before we do as well, if we were to reverse this in a sense, and not look at it from someone that sort of lived a life, but look at it from a child's perspective, if this is a child that's going through the dying process,
yes,
through palliative care or hospice care,
yes,
how is that different in the sense of the parents and the people around that child? I mean, the child won't see it from the same perspective, obviously, as the adults.
No, actually, so I have worked in a pediatric hospice, and I have worked with a number of children who were dying. There are a couple points I want to make. Usually, a child is taught to be fearful of death. So if they are not taught to be fearful, and I mean by reading it on the faces or in the language of their family, children go through the process in a much different way than adults. And children are much more fearful of their parents' sadness. And even if the parents leave the room and are outside crying, children always pick up on that. Children know that they are dying. To keep that information from them is to, again, keep opportunities from them to say things that are important and engage in important ways. Parents, of course, have a very difficult, heart-wrenching time watching a child die. I'm a parent. It is not the natural order for a child to die before a parent. So it's out of sync, and the world can feel like a very crazy place. Parental grief is very, very difficult, and it lasts a lifetime. You don't ever get over that. There is always an empty place in the home when a child dies. Our hopes die when a child dies. Our future dies when a child dies. Our legacy, all those things that we expect to pass on for our own immortality. So parental grief is very, very,
But
very
if
painful. Yeah.
if there is one truth that I have, and I think you have the same truth, is that there is something that continues on, and it's as real as this is now, or realer. Yeah, and
Oh,
and
yes.
they've
Yes.
only transitioned to what me and you would call back home.
Yes.
And there's only our truth. You've got to come up with your own truth. But this has helped us to. Well, it's helped me to make sense of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Sometimes
Yes.
as well.
And in my private practice, when I see grieving parents, but other siblings and grieving children too, one of the things I try to stay open for is a sense of after-death communication. And again, I am in practice because I can hear about those things in a very accepting way when others will poo-poo it or judge it. But after-death communication is very real, and there's been quite a bit of research about it. And again, like the pre-death visions, it's very comforting, and we need to be able to hear it because it helps us to make sense, and it helps us to keep the connection with our loved one. It helps us to keep in relationship, to stay in relationship with our loved one, even though they are deceased.
Yes, I completely agree there. Absolutely, be open to the signs sometimes because they are
Yes.
right there.
Yes.
And I've bumped into people recently who have lost at a young age-ish to have lost parents, and they tell me of these signs that they see, and it's incredible. It really is incredible, but it doesn't take the pain away.
No, it doesn't take the pain away, but I do believe it softens it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, just before we move on here, I think just very briefly, we've probably touched on it. I just wanted to recover it in a sense if we haven't. But the very brief, what the common fears about for those who are dying? What are some of the common fears that you've encountered?
The most common fear is that a person will be emotionally abandoned at the end of life, that people will, a patient, a dying person, is afraid that they will be a burden and their loved one will move away from them, either emotionally stop being connected to them, when what they want so badly at the end of life is that intimacy. They are afraid that people will stop touching them when they need to be connected on the physical level as well. They're afraid that they won't be able to finish business, and that instead of a legacy of love, they will leave a legacy of things that have not been forgiven or regrets. So they're afraid that they won't have the opportunity to say those important things.
Okay, well, that's really important, I think, just to re-emphasize that. So if we know someone close to us that may be suffering, or maybe, when we're all going to go through this process with our parents one day, where some of us already have, some of us are, it's going to happen. Just to remember those wise words that you've said there from your experience, that, being there does actually matter. You may not want to be there because
It
of your
matters.
fears.
It absolutely, your presence is the most important medicine that you'll offer.
Can't say any clearer than that, really. Absolutely. And you have to put your fears to one side and just put them first as well.
Yes.
Now, that's kind of what you did with Dad as well.
Yes.
This is a bit of a touching story, but if you could just go through what you had to go through in this journey. And I believe he contacted you, didn't he?
Yes.
When he knew he was ill.
And you know what? I would even change the language. I didn't have to go through it. I got to go through it. It was a privilege. I had waited my whole life to be able to do this. And so when I was 50, 12 years ago, my father, I was on the East Coast. I was teaching university course in death and dying, and I had a private practice. And on July 4th, my father called and said that it wasn't pneumonia that was dragging him down for the last several months. In fact, they had found it was cancer. It was lung cancer. And so I said, did they tell you what stage it is? And they said, and Dad said, it's stage 4. And I knew what that meant. And I said, okay, well, that means the best case scenario is that we probably have 6 months. So I will be right out to take care of you. And I closed my private practice. And I canceled my university classes, and I said to my husband, I'm going, and I hope that I'll be gone for 6 months, meaning I hope that I would have that long with him.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I flew home to Hawaii and moved in with my dad and became his primary caregiver. And my father's response to that was, everything will be okay now, Lani's home. And I set him up with hospice services. And we asked him, I spoke to him about the real things. Dad, we don't know how much time you have left. You might have 6 months, you might have 6 weeks, you might have 6 days. What is important to you and what do you want to do before you die? And I used those real words instead of skirting around the issue. What do you want to do before you die? And let's write them down and let's find ways, let's look for options to make that happen. And so we made those things happen for him. I asked him who he wanted to see before he died. And I was the gatekeeper, letting them in and making sure that they didn't stay too long, really gauging his energy level. We went through his scrapbooks and he told me stories of his life and who was important to him and why they were important. And we reviewed his life. And we wrote his obituary together, and we talked about what he wanted to do for a memorial service. And I was there every night massaging his back and putting him to bed. And in fact, it wasn't 6 months that I had. It wasn't 6 weeks that I had. It was just 13 days that I had with him. And on that last day, he was agitated, but I saw patterns that I see in many patients on their last day of life, and that was almost a ritual of cleansing his body. And I put him to bed that night after I massaged his back. I tucked him in, and I said, Dad, you are the joy of my life. And he said, well, I'm glad I'm the joy of your life, because right now I'm sure not the joy of mine. And that was the last thing he said. And I sat up with him all night. And the next morning, he pulled out the oxygen tube and said, no more. And I said, Dad, if you don't have the oxygen, you'll die soon. Is that what you want? And he said, no more. And I knew what he meant and I knew what he wanted because we had talked through that scenario. So I double checked. And I said, do you want me to turn off the oxygen machine? And he said, yes. I said, I'll be right back. Jumped off his bed, ran down and turned off the noisy oxygen tube, got back into bed with him, cradled him in my arms, sang a soft Hawaiian song to him, watched his breathing decrease and slow down, and then stop.
Yeah, and that's a very powerful story to share with people that have not been through the process, and also that also says to me that you had there wasn't your need to hold on. You were open to let him go, because I think some family members in that situation would want to hold on for their own selfish needs.
Of
well, maybe
course,
not selfish, but
you know,
yeah.
I wanted him to stay. Of course I did.
I
But
know,
it
yeah.
all, but it was all about his values and what he wanted. And I
Exactly.
advocate all the time, I get this life, I get my death. My father's death was his death. It was to be authentic to him. I wanted him to live his death the way he lived his life. And I don't have any right to usurp that. I don't have any right to, it wasn't my death, it was his. And I was there to support him, to accept his wishes, whatever they were. That was my role. And I'm proud that I was able to give that to him. It was my gift to him, and him allowing me in that deeply, that intimately, was his last gift to me.
Yeah, that's the beautiful way that you say it as well, and I think that's such a loving way to come from in that space to do that. And I just wanted you to share that story with us, because I just, you know, if I could put anything in this show, that's an important part of it as well. And just a very final question, what would you say then, in all the years of doing your work, is the most important message?
Well, oh goodness, I think if we knew that death was not the end, that death is not painful, that death is not a judgment, that we could live more fully. And I think that we could live right up to the end of our life in a different way. Yes. Yeah.
Well, Lani Leary, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on our past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.